picture this, right? You're sitting in one of those glass-walled conference rooms.
Oh yeah, the classic fishbowl.
Exactly, the fishbowl. And you've just handed a relatively straightforward piece of feedback to a new, say, 23-year-old hire.
Just standard run-of-the-mill feedback.
Right. And you're expecting a quick nod, maybe, a brief clarifying question, or at worst, a slightly defensive pivot.
Sure. The basic volley office communication. It's a dynamic we all just sort of assume is universally understood.
But instead of returning the volley, the new hire just looks at you.
Just looks.
Yeah. And it's not an angry glare. It's not an eager, attentive gaze either. It is just a completely unreadable, flat, prolonged stare.
Oh, wow. That is uncomfortable.
It really is. And in that silence, the tension in the room just skyrockets. You, as the manager, are left completely baffled, just wondering if you somehow missed a memo on basic human interaction.
Right, like you're suddenly speaking different languages.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive, specifically tailored for you, the learner. Because if you've been trying to navigate the modern workplace lately, you've probably noticed that the vibe has profoundly shifted.
It really has.
The unwritten rules of the office feel like they're being rewritten in a language half the workforce just doesn't speak. So our mission today is to unpack a highly unexpected root cause for these shifting dynamics.
We really want to help you understand the deep psychological underpinnings of why different generations are clashing so hard at work right now.
Right. And to do that, what kind of sources are we looking at today?
Well, we're drawing on some truly fascinating sociological data from the Survey Center on American Life, as well as some brilliant insights from NYU psychology professor Tessa West.
Yeah.
We want to get to the bottom of this structural shift in how young adults process conflict.
Yeah, because if you've noticed Gen Z coworkers seeming a bit standoffish or unusually resistant to traditional office norms, you might just assume it's the classic generational gap.
Right, the whole kids these days complaint.
Exactly. We always complain about the kids. You might blame smartphones or quiet quitting or just the general malaise of the modern era.
Sure, those are the easy targets.
But the thesis of today's source material is going to throw you for a loop. The sources suggest that this very specific flavor of workplace friction might actually stem from the fact that Gen Z went on far fewer dates in high school.
I mean, it sounds almost absurd at first glance, doesn't it? Connecting the corporate boardroom to the high school cafeteria.
It sounds completely unrelated.
It does, but when you look at the data, and more importantly, the neurological and psychological development that happens during those adolescent years, this profound connection really emerges.
Right, so we kind of have to take a detour through those awkwardly lit gymnasiums and cafeteria tables to really understand what's happening in today's offices. Let's lay out the facts here.
Let's hear them.
The Survey Center on American Life recently published some statistics that completely stopped me in my tracks. When surveyed, only 56% of Gen Z adults reported being in a romantic relationship at any point during their teenage years.
Wow, just 56%.
Yeah. And for Gen Z men, it's even slightly lower, at exactly 54%.
And, to truly grasp the magnitude of that number, you have to compare it to the older cohorts who are currently managing these young adults.
Right. The bosses.
Exactly. Over 3/4 of baby boomers, 78% to be exact, had a boyfriend or girlfriend as teenagers.
78%.
Yeah, and Generation X is right behind them at 76%. So we are talking about a 20-plus point drop in adolescent dating in just a couple generations.
That is huge.
It's a massive structural shift in baseline adolescent behavior.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because honestly, my first instinct when I read that was actually a little bit of envy.
Envy, really?
Yeah. I mean, think about the sheer amount of cognitive energy we wasted on teenage romance.
Oh, the drama.
The hallway drama, the agonizing over what a 2-word text message meant, the absolute devastation of a Friday night breakup.
It felt like the end of the world.
It did, and if I didn't have to deal with all of that emotional turbulence, I probably would have learned a second language or mastered coding or something.
That's a fair point.
Right. I mean, I like to think of teenage dating as like training wheels for human interaction or a social boot camp. But honestly, I have to ask, isn't skipping the awkward, messy, deeply painful phase of teen dating actually a huge relief for these kids? Didn't they just save themselves a decade of unnecessary heartache?
What's fascinating here is that the absence of that heartache is the actual root of the problem.
Wait, really? The lack of heartache is the problem.
Yeah, because the data we are looking at shows a much broader pattern. This isn't just a generation deciding to be incredibly practical and focus on their SAT scores or college applications.
Right, they aren't just all studying.
Exactly. This outlier profile was established during Gen Z's most formative developmental window, and it extends far beyond romantic relationships. Separate studies highlighted in our source material show that this cohort just goes out less in general.
They just stay in.
Yeah. They drink modestly, or they don't drink at all. And crucially, they are significantly more hesitant to open up and be vulnerable when they do socialize.
So it's not just dating.
No, it's an entire ecosystem of risk aversion.
So they aren't just skipping the messy breakups, they're skipping the messy everything. They're opting out of the friction.
Exactly. They are avoiding the unpredictability of unstructured, high-stakes emotional interactions. And while that might save them some immediate adolescent anxiety, it denies them the laboratory where older generations experimented with and eventually learned critical emotional regulation.
Okay, so let's bring this right back to that glass-walled conference room. How does skipping the prom melodrama translate into an inability to process feedback from, say, a mid-level marketing manager?
This is where Tessa West's psychological analysis becomes so illuminating. West argues that early romantic relationships are not just about romance.
They're about something deeper.
Right. They are the primary vehicle through which we learn basic, essential social competencies. When you navigate a teenage relationship, your brain is doing heavy lifting.
Like what kind of lifting?
Well, you are forced to learn how to express complex, contradictory emotions. You have to learn how to cooperate with someone whose desires directly conflict with yours.
Right, like where to go for dinner or what movie to watch.
Exactly. And you are forced to learn how to forgive someone who hurt your feelings and how to apologize when you hurt theirs. You even learn how and when to compete.
Because the stakes feel life or death to a 16-year-old, even if they seem entirely trivial to adults looking back.
Exactly. The emotional intensity of a first crush or a first breakup forces the brain to build entirely new neural pathways for conflict resolution.
Neural pathways, wow.
Yeah. West emphasizes a direct, highly observable link between the ability to communicate with a romantic partner and the ability to communicate with a boss or coworker.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you never navigated the rocky, painful shoals of adolescent romance, you simply lost out on practicing those vital interpersonal skills in a relatively low-stakes environment.
Yeah.
You don't have the neurological muscle memory for dealing with real-time interpersonal friction.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text points out exactly how this lack of muscle memory manifests at work. It perfectly describes the behaviors driving managers crazy right now.
Absolutely.
It explains Gen Z's stiffness at taking orders. It explains their hesitancy to speak their minds during collaborative meetings. And it provides the mechanism for that notorious stare we talked about earlier.
The fishbowl stare.
Right, because when you give them constructive criticism, they aren't staring at you out of disrespect or defiance.
No, they aren't trying to be rude.
They are experiencing an evolutionary freeze response. Because their nervous system hasn't been habituated to real-time, face-to-face interpersonal conflict like a spat by the lockers, a mild piece of professional feedback triggers a disproportionate cortisol spike.
Their stress goes through the roof.
Exactly. They literally do not have a script for how to respond to an uncomfortable interpersonal moment in real time. They are frozen.
It's a genuine biological reaction.
But I do want to push back on this just a little bit.
Sure.
I hear what Tessa West is saying, but is a high school breakup really the only way to learn how to compromise on a spreadsheet? I mean, that sounds like a stretch. A teenage romance is about raging hormones, not navigating a Q3 budget dispute.
I get that. It sounds like a stretch until you look at the underlying neurology. The brain doesn't differentiate between personal social anxiety and professional social anxiety.
So it just sees a threat.
Exactly. It just recognizes an interpersonal threat. The amygdala fires the same way, whether you're being rejected by a prom date or corrected by a senior vice president.
Wow.
And West acknowledges that dating isn't a singular magic solution, but rather a very measurable proxy for a much larger issue. The lack of dating is a symptom of a broader ecosystem of isolation. We really have to look at the other environmental factors that shape Gen Z to understand why that cortisol spike is so severe.
Right, so they didn't just miss out on dates. They missed out on the standard issue collisions of human interaction.
Precisely. West points out two incredibly crucial compounding factors in the source material. First, Gen Z is the first generation to pursue education remotely on a massive scale.
The Zoom classrooms.
Right. We're talking about the pandemic, yes, but also the post-pandemic normalization of hybrid and remote learning. For years of their critical development, their primary interface with authority figures and peers was a two-dimensional screen.
Think about the newest hires on your own team right now, learner. When was the last time you saw them resolve a conflict without using Slack or email?
It's probably rare.
Right. Think about being a sophomore in high school or a freshman in college. That is when you learn how to charm a teacher to get an extension on a paper. That's when you learn how to read the room before raising your hand, sensing the subtle physical cues of annoyance or encouragement from the people sitting next to you.
All those nonverbal cues.
Yeah. If your entire classroom experience is just a grid of muted microphones and black squares, you are entirely deprived of nonverbal communication training.
That ties directly into West's second compounding factor. Gen Z is the first true digital native cohort. They didn't just learn online, they primarily communicated with one another online during their youths.
Right, it was all text-based.
Exactly. Their default mode of connection is asynchronous and text-based.
And typing a disagreement in a text thread requires entirely different emotional muscles than resolving a conflict face-to-face.
Completely different.
If you get into an argument on a text thread, asynchronous text acts as a shield. You can put the phone down. You can walk away, think about your response for 20 minutes, draft it, delete it, consult a friend, edit it, and finally hit send.
You have total control.
You have a backspace button. But if you're sitting across a desk from a coworker who fundamentally disagrees with your project proposal, your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, and there is no backspace button.
No backspace in real life.
Exactly. You have to regulate your emotional state in real time. It shouldn't be surprising at all that these digital natives feel significantly less comfortable interacting in person as adults.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see the complex web West is mapping out. You have a cohort that engaged in significantly less in-person socializing and risk-taking during their formative years.
Right.
You compound that with the isolation of remote learning, and you lock it all in place with a digital-first childhood, where conflicts are resolved or avoided entirely through screens.
It's a perfect storm.
It really is. It's like asking someone to fly a manual helicopter when they've only ever operated an autopilot drone. They know the destination, they understand the theory of flight, but they literally lack the tactile muscle memory for the physical controls when the wind shifts.
That is a great analogy.
And the conclusion drawn by the experts in our source material is that employers must be sympathetic to these unique, difficult shaping factors. Writing this generation off as difficult or lazy or entitled is a profound misunderstanding of their developmental reality.
Yeah, you can't be angry at them for lacking a skill they were never given the environment to practice.
Exactly.
But this isn't just an exercise in workplace empathy. If we don't figure out how to bridge this gap, we aren't just looking at uncomfortable meetings, we're looking at a structural collapse in corporate leadership.
The source material doesn't just leave us with a psychological diagnosis. Tessa West issues a dire warning about the labor market.
A dire warning.
Yes. If we keep operating the way we always have, expecting Gen Z to intuitively grasp the unwritten rules, we risk cultivating an entire generation of employees who never become what she calls seasoned insiders.
Seasoned insiders, that is the ultimate goal of a healthy career trajectory.
It is.
You start as an outsider, you learn the implicit paradigms of the office, you bump your head a few times navigating office politics, and eventually you become the person who knows how to seamlessly maneuver through the complex social web of the organization. You become the mentor.
But if these young workers remain incapable of collaborating effectively and terrified of taking the interpersonal risks required to lead, that progression stalls completely.
It stops.
Right. West's warning is chillingly straightforward. When a generation of workers never acquires the tools they need to lead, the pipeline of leadership falls apart.
Wow.
And in time, so too will the organizations themselves. You simply cannot run a multinational corporation or even a local mid-sized agency if your mid-level management tier is terrified of giving critical feedback or resolving interdepartmental conflict.
Okay, so we've identified the root cause from the plummeting rates of high school dating to the compounding isolation of asynchronous digital life, and we see the cliff the labor market is rapidly approaching.
This raises an important question. How do we prevent this collapse?
Right, what do we do?
How do we build a bridge for a generation that never got to build those early social competencies? Well, West provides a very specific, three-pronged solution for business leaders, built around reducing cognitive load.
Reducing cognitive load.
Okay. Yes. Every single piece of organizational messaging must have the singular goal of being absolutely clear and direct.
The era of relying on vibes and implicit corporate paradigms has to end.
It has to. Her first solution is to develop new rules and habits that explicitly reduce the guessing game for everyone.
Think about how much of corporate life is a guessing game for a new employee. Like, does this manager want a daily email update, or do they find that micromanaging and annoying?
Or is it okay to speak up in this brainstorming session, or am I supposed to let the senior partner dictate the direction first?
Exactly. For older generations, figuring out that guessing game was a rite of passage. We used the skills we honed navigating cafeteria cliques.
You just figured it out.
Right, but for Gen Z, that guessing game just triggers intense cognitive overload. Their autonomic response to that anxiety is to freeze, giving you that notorious stare, and then retreat.
And if we're removing the guessing game, managers can't just rely on intuition anymore. Yeah. They have to actually document how they want to be communicated with, which leads to West's second point.
Okay, what's the second point?
Create specific documented rules around how people should communicate for different types of issues. If an issue requires a 5-minute sync over video, state that explicitly in the onboarding manual.
Just lay it out.
Yes. If a project update requires a detailed bulleted email by 4 p.m. on Thursdays, specify that. By providing a clear, rigid framework, you remove the heavy burden of social navigation that they find so paralyzing. You give them the explicit script they never learned to write themselves.
Okay. And the third piece of the solution requires the biggest cultural shift, I think. Organizations must create a culture of asking.
A culture of asking, yes.
As the text points out, anxiety fundamentally leads us to retreat. When Gen Z employees don't know how to handle a delicate client email or a disagreement with a vendor, they won't proactively knock on your office door and say, "Hey, I'm not sure how to approach this."
They won't ask for help.
No. They will just avoid the situation entirely, letting the email sit in their inbox for 3 days. To a manager, that looks like incompetence or apathy.
It looks terrible.
But in reality, it is untreated anxiety. Leaders have to actively normalize and even reward the act of asking for help on the how of communication, not just the what of the task.
Organizations must shift the burden of clarity from the employee to the institution. You have to actively dismantle the expectation that people will eventually just figure it out through osmosis.
So what does this all mean? When I look at all of this together, learner, I'm struck by a really beautiful irony hidden in the sociological data.
An iron.
Yeah. We are talking about implementing all these hyper-clear, direct communication strategies. We are eliminating the toxic ambiguity, writing down the unwritten rules, and removing the invisible workplace divisions.
Right.
We are doing this specifically to accommodate a deficit in Gen Z's social conditioning. But the reality is, eliminating unspoken rules is going to drastically improve the lives of staffers of all ages.
Oh, absolutely. It is a textbook example of the curb cut effect.
The curb cut effect. What's that?
Well, when city planners design a sidewalk with a sloped ramp to accommodate people in wheelchairs, they suddenly find that people pushing strollers, delivery workers hauling carts, and travelers pulling rolling luggage all benefit immensely from the exact same modification.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Right. By redesigning our workplace communication to accommodate the neurological anxieties of Gen Z, we inadvertently create a significantly less stressful environment for the Boomer and Gen X employees who've been exhausting themselves playing corporate political guessing games for 30 years.
Because nobody actually likes the guessing game.
No one does.
We just accepted it because we thought implicit hierarchy was the only way to operate a business. We thought we were supposed to leverage those survival skills we learned during high school romances and breakups. But maybe we shouldn't have to constantly read between the lines just to do our jobs.
The coping mechanisms learned in adolescence are not necessarily the healthiest foundations for a professional environment. Relying on teenagers' emotional toolkits to run a modern company is a flawed premise from the start.
It really is. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken on today's deep dive. We started with a startling statistical anomaly, Gen Z's massive 20-point drop in teenage dating rates compared to previous generations.
Right.
We explored the neurological implications of that data, showing how skipping those early, messy romantic relationships deprived them of a crucial low-stakes training ground for real-time emotional regulation and conflict resolution.
Exactly.
We then layered in the compounding effects of remote learning and an asynchronous digital native childhood, creating an environment where face-to-face face conflict triggers a physiological freeze response.
That fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah. And finally, we looked at Tessa West's vital solutions, replacing the anxiety-inducing cognitive load of the modern office with clear, explicit, documented rules of communication to save our leadership pipelines.
It is a profound shift in how we understand generational friction. It moves us away from judgment and towards structural empathy based on developmental science.
Empathy over judgment.
Right. But it also leaves us with a rather provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this entire conversation framing Gen Z's lack of traditional social conditioning as a deficit, a missing skill set that threatens the corporate pipeline.
Yeah, that's been the whole framing.
But if the modern workplace is now being forced to abandon its unspoken rules and guessing games to accommodate them, could Gen Z's lack of traditional social conditioning actually be the exact catalyst that forces corporate culture to become fundamentally healthier, more explicit, and more transparent for everyone?
Wow.
Are they the workplace disruptors we didn't know we desperately needed?
What a phenomenal question to end on. Maybe the generation that skipped the drama is the one that's finally going to cure the drama of the American office. To you, our learner, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep observing your workplace, keep questioning those unwritten rules, and most importantly, keep learning. We'll catch you next time.